IVM.
Hi and welcome to Know Your Kanoon. This is Amber from AM Rana Ventures. Welcome to another episode where we have our overseas partners with us today to discuss immigration at length. Today we have new guests, probably who haven't been introduced earlier on the show. We've always been talking to Stephen Hylete and other associates of the firm, Green and Spiegel. But today I have two interesting gentlemen and rather very serious gentlemen in the practice. I have Evan Green, who's the brother of Stephen Green and also a senior partner at Green and Spiegel and one of the founders. And I have Timothy Golden, who's heading the US practice as a director for Green and Spiegel. Then I have my business partner, Mr. Varun Madhok, who is a real estate giant and currently working in AM Rana Ventures as our business partner. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here with us. Evan and Tim, happy to have you guys here. Thank you so much for sparing your time today. We've always had Stephen, but it's good to have you guys as well.
Well, you practice with Stephen and then you get it right with us. There you go. That's how it works.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure doing an MOU with you guys and having you here and talk about Canada and US. So I'm going to come right to the crux of things, and that is that we have this huge competition in India, and I have a diaspora of clients who say US is better than Canada as far as the immigration goes. And you guys are the stalwarts in each of the practices. And it's a different country, different ball game on immigration. So I'll start with you, Evan, first. What do you have to say about that? Is it really that easy that people say that, Canada is much more a preferred destination than US if it comes to immigration per se?
Well, you have to start with the basic premise of how the government feels about immigration. It is Canadian government policy of all our parties, our three national parties, that immigration is good. We need more immigration, and it's a positive thing. So we start with that. The three parties then decide how best to give it to family, economic, refugees, dividing it up. But we all say it's good. The US doesn't say that, okay? So that's the biggest starting point, that Canada wants immigration, it recognizes the benefits of immigration, and it understands that it has to have programs to attract people internationally. That's what I would say the biggest starting point, as opposed to the US, where there is no, shall we say, settled opinion that immigration is good.
Absolutely. Tim, I'd like you to come in.
Agree with this assessment.
Yeah. I'd like you to come in now. Let's make it versus.
Well, I mean, I just think Evan identifies not something that's Trump-based. It's centuries and centuries within the United States where there are new programs because they don't like who's coming from certain areas of the world. So that's troubled the U.S. throughout. And Canada, as a result, I mean, obviously, we also have to consider it's a nation of 300 million versus 30 million. So, those kind of things and that kind of ease with the government system is much easier. But at the same time, I would also say that the U.S. is very stark in how you can get in there. It's either you're employed, a relationship, a family relationship, or, a very limited investment type scheme that's been troubled for a long time. And that's been going since the 50s. They've just been sort of building onto this, to the INA that's established from 1950. And there has been no comprehensive. You always hear that idea, comprehensive immigration reform, and they just can't do it.
No, Tim, and I like to now bring in some interesting points demographically, since we're talking about immigration from an economic aspect as well. And then I'll go culturally to the next part of how immigration around the world is being dominated by certain countries. If I look at the Commonwealth countries, which is Australia, New Zealand, and then I look at Canada being an erstwhile, of course, Commonwealth again. And when I compare it to US, I see that these countries still have the trend of accepting different diaspora of economic background coming into them and being effective in the economy in terms of giving it the push it needs. Whether you take Australia into picture, you look at New Zealand, you look at, of course, Canada again being a stalwart in this. And let's go back to the 60s when I'm sure the trend at that time around the world was to have people from different areas come in and contribute to the economies due to different various reasons which the countries had. and I'm not politicizing it, but let's say the Sikh community came first to Canada. I mean, as from India, I would say the subcontinent being there, the Indian subcontinent, if we talk about, and they've contributed hugely, and so is US. But why is it that I would say, I'm going to leave other political factors out, but from an economic perspective, you see the growth in US due to the immigrants has been huge. I mean, you cannot say no, that US does not need investors. It does not need people to invest in US, or the population ticket size is huge. Why is it more because of, I would say, the dominance in terms of global trade, treaties, etc.? Because I believe in the concept of open economy. And if you see the amount of investments which I would say the Asian diaspora has done, it's great in either of the countries, whether it's the Commonwealth or the otherwise. What do you have to say about that? Don't you think it's detrimental to the US overall in terms of an immigration policy?
No, I was going to say that you're preaching to the choir here. I mean, we both say that immigration is good. But the problem is in the US, there's many voices in government and out of government who want things closed down from an immigration perspective, whether it be union, whether it be tribalism. I mean, we have overall shifts in the economy. I mean, Donald Trump's manifest was basically to shut it all down, right?
Yeah.
That's what he wanted to do.
I think you make a point when you say that, it's political now. In fact, actually, immigration's been political forever. I mean, it's always been about identifying this is a troubled area. Will allow, this diaspora coming from Eastern European when we're fighting communism. So those decisions are made. And then there are also reactionary decisions like we see, for, building the railroads within the United States. Bring them in, but then try to extricate them and then stop it. So I think that is in comparison to Canada, where Canada really does try to do some analysis, understand what they need. Instead, it's political, making those good pushes to bring in people that, internationally are seen as needing this. But then on the other side, as Evan identifies, all these conflicts between unions and employers makes it all happen under the table until we get to some point in history, which we do. George W. Bush had one, Clinton had one, Reagan had one, where it is a talking point for the extreme right to say, well, all these people are illegal. Yeah, because you didn't give them any path. And employers needed this, this resource for cheap labor, which again, they push it and they politically try to manipulate that. But it's the awful word for all those far right is amnesty, because, individuals are here, they have no status, and we've just got to, give another pass every couple of decades.
No, rightly said, Tim. And, I'll now take my personal example. When I was to choose between countries and I had three options, my family was in Australia being settled for decades and decades. Then I have family in US who are doing fairly well. They're into the tech sector. They're really well settled. My sister's there and everybody's there. But I chose to be in Canada. If I look at how economically and, from a diversity perspective, and now I'll start bringing in my idea of the podcast where we want the listeners to understand, not from a political perspective, but the ease of doing business, the ease of expanding, the taxation aspect and stuff like this. And when I looked at Canada from that perspective, I tried to think of it that, the whole friendlier image you project, and which comes across, and people have given experiences of the Canadian immigration being so thorough and transparent. Whereas in US, as you said, family members still have access, they can still move in, but there is a waiting of over a decade for even citizens to get their brothers and sisters in. And they might be high net worth individuals in the country, overseas or anywhere, but they still can't have an entry. And I'll give you a classic example. The classic example is I was working in your office with Jonathan on one of my clients, and I'll not name the client, but the client already has his whole family in US and they're working in Atlanta on projects, etc. But still he couldn't find a way. Whereas if I look at Canada and where he wants to expand his business, his ease of setting up everything and running, that gives the Canadian immigration an edge. And the investor lobby, I believe, even the tech sector now, especially from India, Tech Mahindra moving, Amazon planning to expand, etc. Don't you see that that kind of invites more talent into the country? What do you have to say? I mean, what would you have to say on that? Again, this is a different angle.
You look at it in 2017, June of 2017, the government of Canada introduced a program called the Global Talent Stream. which was specifically to address the lack of IT talent availability. And the government accepted that there is a shortage of these workers. How do we get them in for the companies? There is no such program in the United States, period. Right. I mean, the big thing was, Tim, when did they introduce the STEM extensions for students? That's about it. And if you don't win the H1B lottery, you're out.
Well, that's what I would put as the marker. And this is when I first started working on it. The dot-com bust, when Congress said, we don't need this many H's anymore. That was it. I mean, and Amber, I think you're talking about sort of those entry points. And the great entry point for the United States of America for a long time was their unmatched university system. You come in, you stay as long as you want, we can perpetuate you on that F1. And then the most important thing, which they introduced, but now you really can't be taken advantage of because of the H, is the ability to port your F over to an H1B, to file that, and then have that continuation of work authorization up until you become an H. And when I started doing this, it was 250,000 were available. Now it's been 85,000 for way too long. And what do you do? I mean, I think you put it perfectly, which is I'm graduating, I've got no options, and even the STEM extension and the obligations for an employer, where am I going to go? Might as well go north, because there are immediate availability, and as Evan said, the identification by a unified Canadian government to say this is a problem we have to solve, versus the US where it's no free ride for these people, which again, it's not a free ride, it's contributions to the economy and good work that they continue.
I mean, the other thing in the Canadian system as opposed to the US system is we don't even like temporary workers in Canada, because our goal is to switch temporary to permanent. We want them to participate in our society, become full members of society, eventually getting citizenship. So the goal is, okay, bring them in temporarily, but how quickly can we switch them over and get them permanent status? Whereas, in the US, if you're an Indian national on an H, how many years, Tim, to get permanent residence?
Oh, permanent residence with backlogs? I mean, it depends. I mean, are you extraordinary ability? Maybe you sneak through and you're not impeded in EB1, but outside of that, there's a long background and all of that assessment, local labor assessment. That's, I think, always an interest to me, Evan, is that sort of flip on the LMIA, where Canada looked to the US to their most intense labor certification sort of structure for temporary sort of H1B equivalency. I always thought that was really, the toughest slog available is what they sort of mirrored for the LMIA process.
But at least there's a path.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just labor certification and green cards for anybody from China, for anybody from India. It's just, unless, again, you're at the top of the heap, you're in a difficult situation, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of end in sight for it.
So come on down to Canada and we'll figure it out.
No, Mr. Varun, you have a question, please go ahead.
Yes, okay. I have an independent question with Tim as well as Mr. Green. What are the real estate opportunities as well as investment opportunities, Canada versus America? So in terms of what are the investments as an investor turning up to these countries in real estate and other opportunities?
I think that's a great question, because there's just not a lot, as we talked about, in sort of a permanent format. For a client, they come to me and say, well, we want to invest in the United States. I said, well, there's one way to do it. And it's EB5, which is, just a troubled program. You're not going to see anything for 2 years plus, versus, the proposal, which is, the bilateral trade agreement between US and Canada, or US and your home country. The E2 process is great. And they've been fighting really hard to remove the dual intent issue for a long time. There's a guy who's on MSNBC all the time. He used to be a big proponent. He's not in politics anymore, of trying to lift that. And that is, it's a frontline article on in the New York Times, every couple of years. Family from France had to go back because their E2 was rejected. So, I mean, those are those sort of soft tissue areas, which, again, comprehensive immigration. It only is going to work if it's 2,000-page proposal to the Senate, rather than doing these sort of small fixes, which, it's ridiculous to think that I can come in, as you say, Varun, develop an entire real estate operation with employees, with business, with buildings, et cetera. And then they say, oh, no, sorry, you've always got to go back to your home country, despite the fact that, you've built all of this here in the United States.
And Mr. Green, what's your opinion on this in terms of...
Well, in Canada, there's a difference between passive and active investment. If you had an existing real estate company in India, you were coming into Canada to establish a real estate firm, hire Canadians, that's great. We can work with that, okay? As an intercompany transferee, we can work with that. But if you're just an investor buying a building, that's going to be harder, okay? I mean, you may be allowed to do it legally, but it doesn't have an immigration consequence unless we can show what is the significant benefit to Canada in terms of employment for a situation such as that. That's what they want to see, that there's a benefit to Canada, not just a benefit to you in purchasing.
No, I'll put it to you guys on this. And when I was working with PricewaterhouseCoopers way back in the time, and I used to handle some part of taxation for my clients, which was US and Canada. And if I compare from an immigration perspective, how tax structure really helps manufacturing, right? Back in about 2009, 10, US was a hotbed when I would come to a situation where manufacturers would look to run there. But then I look at corporate taxes, I look at other federal taxes, and I see the NAFTA treaty between Mexico, US, and Canada. And given the current state of affairs of corporate taxes in Canada, what would you suggest to manufacturers? Because there are a lot of potential manufacturers in India who have seen growth, and there is industry, the bimetal industry, where it requires some sort of manufacturing, and China being the only competition, but China being given the blockade by rest of the world in this industry. And you see India is a fall leader in this industry, and there are potential people looking forward. And all I hear from them is, well, I would want to go to Canada because the corporate tax is just what I would want to look at. And, it's pretty easy to do my filings and work around everything else. And I get the access to US and I get the access to Mexico. So what would you suggest to manufacturers if I compare both regimes? How easy would it for them to seek the whole immigration process and set up the whole unit? What do you have to say about that?
And it's the raw materials all in abundance there.
What I would say is you got to get proper tax advice, right? That's what I would say. Okay, there are certain benefits and things that you can get and subsidies and whatnot, but you want to start your project with that, okay? And get the correct tax advice before you set things up, because there are certain advantages that are available in various locations. And that is not our expertise, but we would refer out for sure.
And why I put you to go, why I put this to you guys was, of course, tax being not our topic of discussion, but it really drives immigration as well.
Of course, that's the first thing we do.
Yeah, I mean, it drives immigration.
Anybody's moving across a border, whether it be India to Canada or Canada to the US, the first thing we say is get tax advice, because there's an effect on all this stuff for you.
No, and
I would say that there still is sort of a prevalent standard from people to say, I want to get to the US.
Right.
I think we say all the time, person comes, gets Canadian citizenship, and then wants to go to the US to, set up a business because it's easier, lower taxes, all that type of stuff. I think Evan makes a very good point, which is if you get it done right, you can make it work in Canada, but there is this knee-jerk reaction. US taxes are lower, so that's where I want to be.
No, of course. And why I raise this point, because currently in India, due to the pandemic situation, the HNI circle, the big manufacturers, or I would say the MSME manufacturers, are looking to move. And in my discussions with Stephen, whenever I have those, the main thing that comes up to us is, how do I move? Like, I have a huge client who's been a legacy client in India into textile. His turnover would be upwards of 100 million. And he's been asking me that, I want to expand in Ontario, I want to expand there. And he says, US right now, because of the amount of investment, I need to set up a manufacturing unit. I mean, even acquiring something, from an immigration perspective, and the inheritance tax, etc., is blocking his move to coming to US. Now I'll come to my second last point on this, that immigration driven from a labor perspective, immigration driven from managerial job perspective, and immigration driven from professional perspective, breaking into three parts. The hotbed, even for tradesmen, craftsmen, still remains US, and we see the amount of attempts that happen. Don't you think that when it comes to Canada, the process for immigration for federal skilled trade workers, then the professionals is easier, whereas in US, again, it's the same process?
Well, it's certainly, there are options in the Canadian system, and they've moved, especially during the pandemic, to meet their numbers, and they've expanded who can and cannot qualify. So that has become somewhat easier during the pandemic, but that's only for people who are already here. If you're overseas, forget it. It ain't going to happen. But yeah, they have expanded, because going back to my first point, which is the Canadian government views immigration as positive. And we have numbers that they're trying to meet every year. During the first bit of the pandemic, the numbers went much lower than what they were hoping for. And because of that, they have much more availability this year, and they know that they have to push to make their numbers, and they want to make them. And I mean, when you look at the numbers in Canada compared to the US, proportionately, I think we're 3 or 4 times the amount of immigration compared to the US at this point.
Absolutely. And Tim, what would you have to say on that?
In terms of specialties and manufacturing positions and sort of tech people, I mean, you mentioned that that's the preference for people to get to the U.S., but it's hard to get there. I mean, they're very limited. Sometimes we can push it in the TN category for Canadians, in a very distinct category, but that's pretty much it. I mean, welders, all that. I mean, that's one of the big things. If you're going to have a drum to beat from CBP, what are you coming for? Why do you have these tools? You're entering the U.S. job market, and then that's where you're really lost. And then sort of the idea that some of the different categories, one that we use obviously quite consistently, the E, that's one that you can't just sort of bring in union workers or undermine unions in any capacity there. So I would say that's, it's not something that the destination for, skilled workers outside of very professional positions. I would say that the U.S. does not have anything that's really a sort of soft landing spot.
No, and guys, because today we have paucity of time, I really wanted to sit more with you on this and maybe have extensively a discussion, because there's a cult of people who follow us who want to know more about US. But last questions to you guys in 2021. What do you see in terms of immigration? If I would say someone who's potentially looking for US, a lot of students are looking out for US. A lot of potential IT people are looking out. Amazon is hiring people left, right, around the globe, but US is a hotbed destination, the web services, etc. But from an immigration perspective, what is the forecast you guys can give to my audience today and say, this is what they can expect if they compare both the jurisdictions for the coming 2021, the rest of the year?
I'll go first. I think that because of the COVID restrictions and what's the situation is in India right now, things are taking a lot longer than they were pre-pandemic. And because of that, it's going to be difficult for the government to meet their numbers. So there will be availability for people who are in Canada continuing, probably, I would say, for at least the next 18 months. But the key is you need a job, you need to come, and you'll be able to qualify faster once you're here compared to pre-pandemic. That's what I would say in terms of forecast. Over to you, Tim.
I would say it's pretty dismal. I mean, before the next election cycle, unfortunately, out of the gate, it was, immigration, we're going to deal with all, and they just can't. 2011, they had that on their desk. They can't, there's no way they would ever agree to that right now. And that's what I mentioned, which is it's just never going to be done that way, at least in, the current environment. It's going to be, let's convince enough people that H-1B numbers are going to be appropriate. Let's let Tom Cotton step in and put those restrictions on wages, et cetera. It's just going to be such a movement that I expect probably more executive orders. I don't think they're going to do as many because it's just become too much of a hot potato between administrations. And then, ultimately those small pieces like DACA agreement, coming to that, bringing that to Congress, H-1B, as I mentioned, and, an investor visa that I think could be cleared up. But that I think is a much bigger lift in terms of that. But I hope H-1B numbers, and I hope some sort of resolution on DACA and, just faster services. It's been 4 years of just hideous pushback at every turn. I think that's what they're really pushing for now, is to sort of clean up the process and get these things in and out. And hopefully H-1B numbers and DACA.
No, hopefully, because the whole sentiment around the world was, especially India, that once the Trump regime changes, the things will become much easier. And thousands of applicants, who even approach us, and then when I connect them to your US office or we have discussions, they all then ultimately, I think, look forward to Canada. And I am seeing a huge boom, maybe because of that everybody just says, hey, I mean, if you're blocked there, let's go there. So, guys, today has been a really short time for us, but thank you so much for being here. We really couldn't delve into deeper conversations on this, but I'm going to have you guys more now since I'm acquainted very well with your areas of practices. And thank you so much for being here and giving your 25 minutes to us. Thank you, guys.
Oh, it's my
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Thanks so much for
Thanks,
having us.
Amber. Thank you, Tim. Thanks, Mr. Green.
Very nice
Bye
to meet you
now.
guys.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week. Thank you so much to Cred, CED, and Global Victoria. Without you guys, this thing would not be possible. So, on the note, Maruk Inayat gives us an overview of the potential Twitter ban in India. On this round is on me. Gauri Devi Dayal was joined by actor-producer Purna Jagannathan to talk about her career in Bollywood, Hollywood, and theatre. She talks about the upcoming season of the show Never Have I Ever. On Cyrus Says, we had legendary musician Usha Uttup. She took us through her journey and shared her experiences as the unconventional musician. In the second installment of the Father's Day special on Akla Station Adulthood, Ayushi has a candid conversation with her father, Siddhartha Amin. On the Global Victoria Tech Talks podcast, we showcase some compelling new tech stories coming out of Melbourne. Whether it's from the buzzing gaming industry or the robust edtech sector, Victoria is increasingly becoming a hub of emerging technology. And we talk to some thought leaders and industry legends about the same. Catch all the action from the World Test Championship on the Edges and Sledges podcast. For our Hindi listeners, we have Khel Niti, which goes live on YouTube every morning. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Want to learn something new and have a few minutes to spare? Well, then go for the Traveling Professor's Diary, where I, Siddharth Deshmukh, the Traveling Professor, will help you glean from all the insights that I've gained from wherever I've traveled, learned, taught, and repeated. Join me every Tuesday and Thursday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.